Dragon Ballers, if you're looking to buy Dragon Ball Super or One Piece sealed product, make sure to get 5% off using my link to Mystic TCG down in the description. You can also sell cards to them using their Facebook link, which is also down in the description. Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, I want to go over some tips for Dragon Ball Super card game that are going to translate to you winning more games. There's quite a few reasons why I want to do some more new player friendly content, one of which I've seen a handful of new players at my locals, and that's absolutely awesome. I do think that in certain areas of the country, local scenes for Dragon Ball Super are suffering, so hopefully more and more players decide to try out Dragon Ball Super, and hopefully videos like this help facilitate that. Also, we're in the competitive off season for Dragon Ball Super, so I think it's the perfect time to be doing more new player competitive friendly content. And third, we are getting the digital client for the Dragon Ball Super card game, hopefully in the near future. We'll be getting more information about that in March at the Dragon Ball Super Battle Hour, but I do think that's going to bring a lot of new players to the game, so I think having content out there like this is going to be really helpful for all those players. This video is really targeted towards either brand new players or players that are new to competitive card games, or players that have been trying their hand at competitive Dragon Ball Super and maybe just not seeing the results that they want to see. So we're going to go over some abstract concepts in this video. If you have any questions about anything, please do drop them in the comments. I'll be sure to answer back. And if I get enough questions about the same thing, I'll probably make a targeted video just for that. But if you have questions that I don't talk about in this video as they pertain to competitive Dragon Ball Super, drop that in the comments down below as well. I'll try to see what I can do by making a video for it. But anyways, with that being said, if you guys are new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video. And if you guys want to dive deeper into competitive content, check out the Patreon down in the description. I got a whole database of competitive articles there, and I also do coaching if you are interested in stepping your game up that way. Anyways, let's jump right on into this, talking about the first concept, and that is understand that the game is contextual and not curve based. You don't know how many times I've heard players say, oh, he just played his SCR on turn 4 and I lost the game. Sure, that can happen, but that mindset, that mentality of every time my opponent plays their SCR, I lose the game, take it, throw it in the trash. That's not going to cut it at the competitive level of Dragon Ball Super. And that whole mindset comes with the game being contextual, because either you could have probably done something about your opponent's SCR play, or maybe your deck wasn't built properly for their SCR and the popular SCR of that particular meta. But regardless of that, let's talk about this concept. So what is a curve-based game? Well, when you have a game like Dragon Ball Super or One Piece or even Magic the Gathering that has a mana system like we do, basically what that means is if I have a 1-drop, I play it on turn 1. If I have a 2-drop, I play it on turn 2. If I have a 3-drop, I play it on turn 3, so on and so forth throughout my turns. That is a curve-based game, and Dragon Ball Super honestly is anything but a curve-based game. Most of our cards never actually play for what their actual energy cost is. Look at SS4 Gogeta Triumphant Together. This card's an 8 cost. You're never paying 8 for this. You are going to pay 4 for it using its Union Fusion ability. Now, going back to that curve-based gameplay, do I just play Gogeta every single turn 4 of every single game? No, because we're not playing on a curve. Just because this thing costs 4 does not mean it has to be played on 4. Now, that's not to say that you should never play it on 4, and that's where the context comes in. But now, even if you're not playing curve-based, even if you understand Dragon Ball Super is not a curve-based game, how do I know whether I need to play SS4 Gogeta on turn 4 or not? Well, a lot of times you don't want to tap out in the Dragon Ball Super card game, because a lot of our cards that act as our defenses cost energy, so I want to make sure we have the adequate energy to use those cards. But sometimes your defenses are all free. Maybe you're playing cards like Testing the Opposition, which take a life instead of using energy to activate. Maybe using a card like King Vegeta's Imposing Presence that has a discard cost instead of an energy cost to be used for free when you're at a certain life total. Again, those are all the contextual things you have to keep in mind, and all those different options at your disposal are going to dictate whether you are able to tap out for a card like this on turn 4 or not. There's the context. But now let me give you another situation, right? Let's take this into account. What is the main purpose of SS4 Gogeta Triumphant Together in our SS4 Gogeta deck? For me, it's board control. It's board clear. This card is able to attack every single battle card in active mode when paired with the leader's ability. There is a scenario too where Gogeta can be used to almost guarantee win the game, and that's in a very specific scenario where my opponent's at 3 or less life, and I know they have very few super combos in their hand because I've used most of them, and their hand is very low. That's where Triumphant Together can go in, ignore any negates, ignore any blockers, and my opponent is probably going to lose on the spot. But that's a very niche scenario. The main purpose of this card is going to be to clear board. But now if I'm going into my 4 energy and my opponent has a board of only 1 battle card, do I really want to pay 4 for this card and do that just to clear 1 battle card? Probably not. What I'd rather do with all that energy is probably play way more battle cards, make a way more threatening board that actually sticks around, because Gogeta doesn't actually stick around for more than one turn unless I Z Awaken. So with that in mind, I can play way more battle cards, maybe not even tap out, again going back to whether or not I need to use energy for defenses going into my opponent's next turn, and I can still probably clear their board with one card, and again make a much more threatening board, and save this for if my opponent's able to make a much bigger and more threatening board. So that's a little bit of the context that comes with playing competitive Dragon Ball Super. It's very important to know what your opponent's deck is capable of, and that comes with a tip we'll talk about a little bit later. But again, that's the context. You always need to know what is going on in the game, what your opponent is presenting in terms of a board state, in terms of threats they have access to, and their color. Those are all very important things to know, and you'll learn more about that as you play more Dragon Ball Super. I know it's a bit daunting and it seems like a lot to take in, but just playing reps, playing the game, you'll get those things. Now, one thing with contextual Dragon Ball that is kind of just like me ripping off a band-aid is that there's not really going to be many hard and fast rules that I can just tell you and that you can just memorize that'll cause you to start winning games. I know that's a very unsatisfying piece of information to absorb, but it's honestly just the unfortunate truth, so I have to tell you about it. But that being said, the next thing I want to talk about is kind of a hard and fast rule that you can follow to some high amount of success. But again, it's contextual. This isn't always going to hold true, but for the most part, you want to use your skills and effects to keep the board clear and not attacks. This game has so much removal built in. We are almost in set 20 of Dragon Ball Super. At this point, almost every card you play has something that kills another card, and that's a really important thing to take advantage of. You want to use your effects to keep the board clear and not attacks. You want attacks to either go into your opponent's leader to pressure their life total and make them use cards in their hand, or into their unison to remove markers from that unison. But now that we're in the Zenkai block, we've even gotten more answers to unisons to where you don't actually have to always dedicate attacks into the unison. The main example of that is Black Smoke Dragon Accumulated Negativity. This thing snipes pretty much any 2 costs or less unison off the board, and you can use that ability to again just send all your attacks to your opponent's leader and put as much pressure on as physically possible. Now, there are basically 3 types of removal that most decks have in Dragon Ball Super. If you're playing a deck that doesn't have much removal, you're probably playing like a set 3 or 4 deck, because any deck in the past like 10 sets has tons and tons of removal. So for the most part, every deck has single target removal. The next 2 things that are a bit more rare depending on what color and what strategy you're playing is barrier removal and mass board wipe removal. Not every color and every strategy has access to all 3 or even 2 of those things, so it's very important to know what your deck has access to and what that means you have to do. For example, let's say you're playing red. Red doesn't really have too much barrier removal unless you tech very specific cards that you probably would not main deck in most cases. So for that reason, sometimes you probably have to attack into barrier battle cards to get them off the board. That's a real big deal in, let's say, the SS4 Gogeta matchup when you're facing down Lord Slug Super Namekian. That's a barrier battle card that gives you a lot of trouble, and if you are not main decking the specific tech that kills it, or you don't happen to draw it, you're gonna have to attack into that barrier battle card to get it off the board, because if you don't, you're probably going to lose the game. And again, going back to unisons, it's oftentimes very important to attack into unisons unless you're in the color green, which actually has access to the most unison marker removal out of any color in the current Dragon Ball Super card game format. But yeah, if you're not dealing with a 2-cost unison that Smoke can easily kill, you've probably got to dedicate attacks into that unison to get it off the board, especially if it is a unison that is vital to your opponent's strategy. Getting that thing off the board can set them back pretty far and put you in a pretty heavy advantage going forward with the rest of that game. Buu Unison is a huge example of this. Getting Buu Unison off the board is vital against most blue decks because it draws them cards, acts as a super big defensive wall that you can oftentimes not really get past effectively. It walls out a lot of SCRs because SCRs for a lot of times don't have barrier, so Buu being able to -1 those things is a big problem. So yeah, you want to use your effects to keep your opponent's battle cards clear when it makes sense to do so, and as much as you physically can, and use your attacks to go towards unisons if necessary, or leaders to apply big pressure. This is a pretty hard and fast rule that I do want you to stick to. I don't want you to attack into 15k battle cards if you can get the thing off the board super easily with a battle card that's going to apply pressure anyway. Then we have another tip here: learn how other decks operate. This is a golden rule that I have followed ever since my days playing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! 6, 7, 8 years ago. This is a really important tip that not a lot of people talk about. When you want to learn how another deck operates, it is very important to play that deck. And you don't have to go spend tons of money just to play a deck that you don't have interest in actually playing competitively. You can use resources like Untap.in and hopefully the online client when that comes out, again, hopefully in the near future. but playing other decks to learn how they operate is super vital. Great example here is the Android 16 blue-green Arrival deck. At 2021 Nationals, this deck managed to take all the way to second place and finish up in the finals. And this is a deck that no one had on their radar because it was super rogue. One player just decided to master the deck, dedicate all their time to it, and it actually ended up working out really well for them. Well, after that, I definitely wanted to respect Android 16 as a real contender if it was able to go all the way to the finals of Nationals. So I started playing the deck myself to learn the ins and outs of it. And you learn the deck way more intricately than you would ever learn by just playing against it, especially if you keep losing over and over again. You're not getting that true understanding of how it works, what the deck is afraid of as well. Playing a deck from the perspective of that player, you will learn a lot more quickly what that deck is actually afraid of seeing and what that deck doesn't want your opponent to be doing in order to stifle its game plan. That's a really important thing to pick up on. So yeah, play the decks that you guys are not having success against. Learn how those decks operate. Use free online tools to do that. Don't go spend a ton of money, and I think you will see a lot more success in that regard. Next up, understand the importance of the Z deck. This is the newest mechanic of the Dragon Ball Super card game. In the past 2 sets, we've gotten the introduction of the Zenkai block, which has introduced the Z deck with Z battle cards and Z leaders. And what the Z deck has really done is caused us to combo in ways we normally would not. For the most part, most leaders can awaken when they get to 4 life, and every leader for the most part starts at 8 life. So the way it used to work is we just take all the damage down to 4 life, and then once we got to 4 life is probably when we start comboing to defend and not take a ton of damage. That ideology is, I don't want to say throw it out the window, but it's not quite as true as it once was, because you need to understand when your Z deck is of high relevance, and you need to combo cards that you would not normally combo in order to get those Z battle cards out onto the board. Now, I want you to think about this in terms of card economy. Card economy is a really important thing to understand for competitive card games. Card economy is generally the cards you have at your disposal, whether that's cards on your board, cards in your hand. We don't really look at cards in our drop or warp as resources unless we can actually use those resources at the ready. Some black decks are able to do things like that. A card like Koitsukai is a resource you can think of like that. But for the most part, let's think about the card economy in our hand. The Z deck is a resource that does not pull from our hand directly, at least. It's a resource that is completely accessible at any time. It's almost like we're playing with 7 more cards in our hand, but we have to combo cards from our hand to access that resource. So in a way, it does pull from our hand. Let's say I want to play a card like Rush Attack Vegeta. This costs 2 Z energy. Let's say I've comboed 1 card this game that I've charged Z energy earlier on, and I want to play Rush Attack Vegeta. Well, I can think of playing Rush Attack Vegeta as playing a card out of my hand if I just go ahead and combo 1 more card. If I already had the 2 Z energy set up, like SS4 Gogeta is really good at doing, then that's even better. This doesn't pull a resource out of my hand, but it's still not a bad trade to essentially treat the Z battle card as a card being played from hand. And what's cool about that is you get to choose the worst card in your hand and just combo it, and now that card becomes a Rush Attack Vegeta. That's a pretty important way to think about it. You've also got to think about the matchups where your Z deck cards are good versus where they're not good and when to prioritize them. For example, if I'm playing blue and I want to use Cell Awakening of the Created, maybe my opponent's deck plays a lot of barrier guys with cost 4 or less that I can't really use Cell against, or maybe my opponent plays a lot of high cost battle cards that cost 6 or more, and Cell is not going to be great there. What would be a better card there is Beerus Area Annihilator, because he can remove battle cards off my opponent's board that have a higher energy cost than their actual current energy pool. So it's very important to understand the importance of the Z deck, how to maximize the value out of it, and how to combo in this new way that's honestly not so intuitive. Again, it makes a lot of sense to just take the first 4 damage of the game and then start comboing later on to defend attacks. But nowadays, we got to combo a little bit more awkwardly on attacks to make sure we can get the maximum value out of our Z deck. And now we're wrapping up today's video with one more tip, and that is win the hand size war. Now, this is another hard and fast rule that I do want you guys to follow as much as you can, but this is easier said than done. This is hard to do, and this really comes down to being a seasoned player. And again, this will get easier for you as you play more games. But winning the hand size war comes down to knowing many things, especially stuff that we've covered. For example, specifically maximizing the Z deck. You may have to sacrifice a bit of your hand to use that Z deck, but you really have to weigh whether or not that Z deck play is worth the minus it's going to take from your hand to do so. Another big contender in the hand size war are cards like Goku Stronger Together, which are generally tied to blue, but there are some generic ones that people can play if they really want to poke at big hand sizes. There is a black Demigraph, for example, that technically any deck can play. I believe it reduces the opponent's hand to 12 cards though, so it's not quite as threatening and punishing as Stronger Together Goku. But keep in mind that if you are playing a deck like SS4 Gogeta that can pretty easily get to like 16, 17 cards in hand, there are strategies out there that can punish you. So how do you actually play around that effectively and not just immediately lose the hand size war? Well, if you're playing Gogeta, what you can do is instead of sitting on a 17 card hand just waiting to get your hand ripped down to 10, you can actually combo more on attacks. And what does that do? It sets up Z energy, and it actually makes attacks way more threatening that your opponent is going to have to actually combo more cards themselves if they don't want to take that damage. And that'll apply more so to when they're at 4 or less life. If I swing with a double striker at my opponent's 4 life and I have 17 cards in hand, I don't want to go back to their turn, have them play Stronger Together, and then have me lose 7 cards from my hand. So I'll combo probably 2 cards on that 20k double strike, make it a 30k, and now they're using just more than 1 super combo to get out of that threatening damage, right? Another important and nuanced tip when it comes to winning the hand size war is know when your board has gotten its value and when to let it go. So here's what I mean. If I've played a battle card that has killed an opponent's battle card and maybe even swung in and done a damage, or maybe swung in and killed a Unison, my opponent goes to their next turn. Let's say they're not following the rules here in this video and they attack into our battle card. We could do one of 3 things. We can negate to stop that, we could combo to keep it alive, or we can just let it die. Well, that card has probably done its job in the sense that it's killed a card and removed a Unison or done damage. So it's probably okay to let that card go and conserve the resources in our hand to either defend later or just play more battle cards later. Again, it's going to be a contextual situation. Maybe that battle card is key for you to go into the next turn with, but in a lot of situations, you have to really weigh how much it's going to cost you to save that card. If it's going to cost you 2 cards in combo to protect that thing from dying, odds are it's probably not worth keeping around, and you'll be able to reestablish a board later on. That's going to play a big part in winning the hand size war. But so guys, that's going to cover it for today's video. Pretty much just a discussion style video. Hopefully I was able to walk you through the scenarios adequately. But if you have any questions, drop them down in the comments. I look forward to answering you guys back. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.